Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on no consequence patching, the art of testing and deploying patches. My name is Rakesh, and I'm joined by Sreya, our product consultant, and Nigel, our senior sales engineer. In fact, Ravi was supposed to join this call, but unfortunately, he couldn't due to overseas travel. He's replaced by Nigel.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We know patching can be risky and potentially disruptive, and that's why we're here to share a framework of testing and deploying patches safely and effectively.
Okay. All right. Now, before we discuss today's topic, let's review our agenda today. We have designed this session to give you a very comprehensive overview of patching strategies from planning and testing to deployment and validation. So you'll have a very solid understanding of each phase.
We'll start with why you should test patches and the need to build an effective patch testing strategy. So, this section is all about how to create reliable and step by step approach to testing patches before they go live. So, we'll discuss key elements like sandbox environments and phased rollouts that minimizes risks and ensure stability in patching.
Okay, now let's start with a memory that still lingers, with us. Yes, the famous blue screen of death. You might remember the widespread disruption caused by this incidents, by the famous CrowdStrike episode, where countless devices across the globe came to a halt. It occurred, as they pushed a security update, which caused widespread security outage. So, yeah, what's your view on this? How do you view this?
Yeah, it was more than just a technical glitch. It became a global issue affecting millions of devices across industries. So, without adequate testing, patches may interact unpredictably with existing hardware configurations, or even legacy systems that are still widely used in sectors like healthcare and infrastructure.
I would just like to go ahead and jump in here. This screen really brings back a lot of bad memories to me. And basically, this vividly reminds us of what can happen if you go ahead with deploying patches without adequate testing. Right? So you have to go ahead and test these patches out before the actual deployment in your environment. We have come across this screen quite a bit. It is instantly recognizable to many of us around the world, and it is often associated with a critical system failure, one that you're likely not want to go ahead and look at with your morning cup of coffee once you do log in. It represents a critical and complete halt of your environment where you have a multitude of reasons that can happen, such as the devices which can go around, leading to lost work, interrupted services, and the dreaded downtime, which we all would like to avoid.
All right. Now, let's dive into the numbers, behind the importance of patching and testing. Now, these numbers do tell a story. That the impact this goes beyond just fixing vulnerabilities. We're talking about incidents that has affected millions of devices and disrupted critical industries. Nigel, what's your view on these global outages?
It's funny that you should mention this, Rakesh, because let me paint you a quick picture here. Fairly recently, approximately 8.5 million Windows devices worldwide were affected in just one solitary incident. Now, I'm not going ahead and talking about a few isolated devices in a few users in a few niche companies, not at all. This was a big hit. It hit organizations across different verticals and different sectors: airlines, healthcare, government, and even infrastructure, to name a few. They were on their knees due to one simple mistake that came up. The sheer scale of this disruption shows exactly why we need to get our patching right, why we need to hit the nail on the head when it comes to our patching activities.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And when things go wrong, the financial losses are huge. Like in the UK, costs ranged between 2.18 billion and 2.96 billion for this one incident alone. So over in the US, large organizations they face losses of around $10.8 million dollars each. So these numbers are staggering. So, but they're also a reality check on the cost of reactive patching.
Yeah, that's true, Shay. What you just mentioned, the cost of reactive patching, that's very important. Imagine the ripple effects. You have seen flights getting delayed, hospital systems down, government operations being paused. We are not talking about just data loss. We are talking about factors like business continuity, reputation, and even public safety.
And that's actually a good segue, Rakesh, into why we need to focus
Mm.
on today's topic at hand. No consequence patching. It is very important. It is imperative for us in our day-to-day functioning. The numbers you see on screen here, they are a sore reminder of the potential damage that can occur if you go ahead and roll out patches without successful testing, without having a proper plan in place prior to your actual production deployment. Today, we'll hopefully guide you guys, guide the audience here, and by the end of the session, help you build a patching process that reduces these risks and causes you to be a bit more safe in the long run, somewhere down the line.
All right. Now let's tackle the bigger question. Why should you test patches before deployment? It's easy to think of patching as a quick fix, but in reality, deploying without testing can lead to more harm. As we see here, an outage caused by an untested patch can cause a whole lot of issues. So, what happens? What really happens when these patches aren't tested?
You see, these risks are real. So imagine deploying a patch and suddenly facing system instability, machines crashing, productivity halting, and users are frustrated. So who gets flooded with complaints? So it's the IT support teams, right, who are scrambling to control the chaos.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the end of a bunch of tickets flowing into my ITSM platform this way. And that's just one piece of it. That's just a small part of the jigsaw. You have to realize that some patches they interact in unexpected ways with the different applications, the different system configurations, especially in a complex environment where you have these different systems set up. It really is an amalgamation of a huge amount of different instances, basically. Because of this, we have seen cases where organizations have had key applications that have completely stopped working, and to their detriment, may I add.
That's true, Nigel. Let's not forget the bigger security picture here.
Absolutely.
And that isn't a patch that isn't fully tested. It can open up new vulnerabilities, leaving the organization more exposed than ever before. Now, it's a case of trying to solve one problem and accidentally we end up creating more others. That's something.
Yeah, I agree there. The consequences aren't just technical. So when employees experience disruptions, it impacts their productivity. So testing patches help us catch these potential issues early, before they impact the entire organization.
That's true.
So, when we do talk about testing, and we will be talking about it quite a bit further down the line, we are talking about ensuring that the patches they do their job. they actually work as intended. Without causing you to put your head in your hands and tearing your hair out, we want to make sure that the patches actually get to do what they have to do. It's about making sure that each deployment is as smooth as possible, as stable as possible. And the end goal should be to the benefit of the organization you are deploying patches in.
That's very true. Shreya and Nigel, I'll just be back. Just hold on for a minute. I'm so sorry. I just have to get my laptop charged.
Maybe what happens, Rakesh.
Right. All right. So, what do we have again? Now, uh, now let's break down the most common issues, right? That can hit hard when a patch is deployed without testing. Nigel, can you take us through this?
Yep, sure thing. The first thing that we need to go ahead and keep in mind here, Rakesh, when we're talking about not testing patch before deploying, we should look at the system instability. I don't really want to go ahead and paint you too many unpleasant pictures, but bear with me. I'm going to paint you another one here. Imagine you're going ahead and deploying a patch. In your environment, you've come in, you've found out that a particular vulnerability requires a patch. You go ahead and deploy that particular patch. And suddenly, you see a few tickets coming in saying that the systems start crashing down, or maybe someone saying that their system's a bit slow. This happens quite a bit, right? This is all due to the fact that we have been going on without testing these patches out, without knowing what can happen at the end of the road. We see this often when patches haven't actually been tested with all the configurations that they'll interact with once you have deployed this patch.
Yeah. And speaking of costs, untested patches can also increase security risks. So patches are often meant to close security gaps, but if they're not tested, they can actually open new vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and agree there. The risk isn't about security, right? We are also looking at possibility of data getting lost, getting corrupted. These untested patches can also interfere with data storage or processing, or it can lead to loss, or even the information can get corrupted.
Yeah, and let's not forget how it affects the most important component of any organization, the employees. Their productivity goes down the drain if they don't have systems to work on. When systems are slow or they go down or they fail, employees can't necessarily do their jobs more effectively, and they just wind up taking more coffee breaks to the end of the day. We really wouldn't want that to happen.
Yeah, and where do employees turn when there's something not working? The IT support teams, more calls, more troubleshooting, and more pressure on your IT teams to fix the problems that could have been avoided with testing.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. So these issues, what we discuss, it can be avoided, it can be minimized. Testing isn't just a step of the process; it's an essential measure to protect your systems, data, and people from disruption.
That's right.
So it's very important. Yeah. So moving on, Nigel, have you ever noticed how certain patches can create chaos instead of solving the problem? Where we patch one and a box of new ones open up.
Well, absolutely. We're talking about Pandora's box here, where instead of hope coming out, we just have problems coming out the box. A lot of that comes down to compatibility conflicts, however. The thing is, and I mentioned this a bit earlier on in the presentation, we have such a wide variety of systems that exist today, an amalgamation of so many diverse environments. Right? We're dealing with so many systems and different software application that if I were to go ahead and deploy a patch on one system, and I see that patch works perfectly fine, and I go ahead to another system and deploy the same patch, it comes crashing down. So the takeaway here is that a patch that works perfectly on one setup might completely crash another. And don't even get me started when legacy systems are involved. That's a whole other ballgame we're talking about.
Exactly. And with legacy or custom systems, the risks are even higher. Like, some of the setups aren't just prepared for the new patches.
Yes.
That's true. That's true.
Another big issue here is the inadequate testing you're talking about. Now, vendors sometimes release these patches fairly quickly when they see a vulnerability that deems quick attention, that they need to go ahead and release a patch that takes a criticality of, let's say, a severity of 10. In doing so, it's kind of counterproductive where they might not actually have the time to test every single environment that the patch is designated for. So you're left with issues that only surface when you try them out in your own devices in real world setups.
That's true. And also, if a patch, passes the limited testing, it might interact poorly with with other configuration or certain configurations, which is once it is deployed. Now, it's impossible to cover every unique setup.
Yeah, there's also the issue of how patches can have unanticipated interactions with other software, right? So one patch can suddenly cause other applications to slow down or like break entirely. So or even cause dependency issues where one can update in or interferes with another.
That's true. That's true.
Good.
Yeah. Now, this is a very interesting graph we have here. Let's talk about it. It's shocking that how quickly attackers are able to weaponize vulnerabilities these days. Right?
And that is exactly why MTTR has become such a key metric. I just love saying MTTR, it just sort of rolls around the tongue.
Mm,
And the goal is to make sure that MTTR is shorter than the time it takes for these attackers to exploit these vulnerabilities, to let the
mm,
attackers get an upper hand. We really don't want that to happen, honestly.
Yeah, but that's easier said than done. So, if we don't have a streamlined patching process in place, we're already a step behind, right? So, we need to cut down MTTR as much as possible to keep up.
that's true. That's true.
Absolutely. And this is exactly a good segue into why a platform like SanerNow can make the real difference here. Between it's night and day, honestly, in some instances.
Yeah.
So the idea behind automating and prioritizing patching, knowing what you need to go ahead and patch, testing out what you actually need to patch, you can tackle these vulnerabilities much faster, more direct, and get more accurate results. It essentially lets us reduce MTTR by taking away a lot of the manual steps. A lot of the human interactions will go down the drain by a lot of the automation that we can inculcate in your daily processes.
That's that's true, Nigel. Exactly what you said. Automation is the key. Because there is no way we can patch quickly enough if we are totally reliant on manual processes.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There also is the question of prioritization. Not all vulnerabilities are equally dangerous. Now, a vulnerability for me could bring down my entire organization, but for you, Rakesh, it might not necessarily be the case.
Correct.
And that's why you need to have this sort of prioritization in the hand. You need to have that bird in hand there. And with Sailor now, what we have incorporated and inculcated within the platform here is a prioritization framework we call it as the SSVC. Because this framework helps us focus on the ones that you actually need to go ahead and patch first. What are your top 10 vulnerabilities? What do you need to test first? This is all laid out to you in a pretty smooth manner. Takes away a lot of the manual efforts and gives you back a lot of time to look ahead at more important tasks.
It's so true, Nigel. No, so what we are doing is, no, we are not just reducing MTTR or the mean time to remediate in general, but we are also bringing it down to specifically to certain vulnerabilities that are at the highest risk of exploitation.
And that's the key to staying one step ahead, Rakesh. MTTR has to be faster than the weaponization window of the attackers. Right. And platform like SanerNow gives us tools to actually go ahead and do that.
That's true. Nigel. That's the interesting bit. SanerNow does gives us the tools and empowers us to do that, so that we can go ahead and you know fix it.
Right. I have been painting you guys a couple of disturbing images in my previous imagination. So let me switch over to a more rosy side here. Let's go over building an effective patching strategy with SanerNow. It sort of breaks down into three main parts where, namely, you have the visibility, you have the assessment, and then you have the prioritization and the remediation, which is your bird in hand.
Yeah, so visibility is a huge one. Without knowing what assets and vulnerabilities we're dealing with, there's no way we can effectively patch. So, visibility tools really help us map out the entire environment. So, we're not missing anything critical. So, it's like having a real time snapshot of all assets, which is, especially important for large networks.
Okay, that's interesting.
And while spotting these applications and assets is a priority, of course, there's a famous saying, seeing is believing. Well, you could also say seeing is protecting in another word, right?
Correct.
It also is about identifying vulnerabilities across what you find out in your environment. We need a full view. We need a bird's eye view into our own landscape so that we know what we're protecting. We need to ensure that we're not leaving any entry points exposed, anything left under the rock. No, we need to sweep them all and toss it out into the garbage.
Right. Then comes the access stage. So, this means we need the capability to reach every device in our network and ensure it's ready for patching. So, having the control from a centralized platform is a game changer. So, Sena now lets us assess and manage patches remotely. So, we're not sending IT teams all over just to update devices.
That's amazing. It's also a huge efficiency boost. If I were to say, especially for large organizations,
Mhm, it is.
with easier access, we get patches more faster, much faster.
Yeah, then we get to the last piece, that is prioritize and remediate. So this is where we decide which vulnerabilities to tackle first. So SanerNow does a lot of prioritization for us by identifying high risk vulnerabilities based on known threats.
And this remediation is where you put all your pieces together. That's where you build your own strategy. What do you patch first? What do you test out first? Once you have prioritized, it's all about applying patches quickly and efficiently. With Sienna now, automation speeds this whole process up. So you're not necessarily going ahead and deploying these patches manually. You're putting your legs up on the desk here. You're looking at the action take place in front of you, all being done automatically.
Yeah, true, Nigel. What you just said is, it's a complete cycle. Each step feeds into the next. Ensuring that we are not just applying patches, but we
No.
are actually strengthening the organization's security posture. That's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we have spoken a lot about these of patching, of prioritization, of assessment, what are the key metrics that someone must look at? Let's take a look at this. No, let's take a look at the key metrics for patching with Saner now. Defining these metrics beforehand is kind of critical if we need to measure if our patching activities have been successfully done, if they were accurate. The first metric that I believe is pretty important to pay a close attention to here is the deployment success rate. Or in a more layman language, I would say it tells us how many patches actually made it into their intended systems without failing, without dropping off somewhere in the middle. A high deployment success rate means that your patches are reaching their targets, they're being applied more properly, you're taking care of vulnerabilities, and a whole sort of good stuff. But if the rate is low, if you're looking at a pretty low success rate, there are still quite a few gaps that you need to go ahead and pay much more closer attention to. You need to go ahead and address these gaps as soon as possible.
Yeah, so Nigel, it's not about whether a patch made it onto the system. It's more about how effectively. So sometimes patches don't apply correctly on the first try, which can lead to delayed security improvements.
Right. So we need to go ahead and track this metric. Right. By tracking this metric, it not only helps us go ahead and find out how we are doing, it'll also help us identify patterns in failed deployments. If certain systems or configurations consistently fail, or they consistently go down, or they have issues, ensure they aren't getting patched, we need to go ahead and dig deeper into why this is happening. What is the root cause of this failure?
So, Nigel, so when we look at the second metric, stability post patch, this is about ensuring systems are running smoothly after the patch is applied, right, Nigel?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. So a successful deployment doesn't mean much if the patch causes system instability, right? That's another ballgame altogether. The metric that you're looking at here, i.e., stability post patch, helps us track things like crashes, performance issues, or any interruptions that might occur post patch deployment.
That's true. So, so what I understand is SanerNow's monitoring tools helps us to keep an eye on these metrics in real time. The deployment success rate shows us how well we are getting the patches into systems, and stability metrics confirms that they are doing the job without disrupting the workflow. Correct, Nigel? Correct. Did I get it right?
Absolutely. And I just like to quote you when you mentioned before it is a full circle approach. High deployment success rates are pretty good stability scores that have pretty good stability scores rather mean our patches are doing what they're supposed to be doing, securing systems at the end of the day.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So let's dive into, besides the metrics, the actual components of what a proper testing strategy is supposed to look like. Right? Our testing strategy is the onus for this particular presentation. Two main things I would like to bring to the forefront here are sandbox environments and staged rollouts. Now, when we associate ourselves in our minds with a sandbox, we usually go back to our childhood when we find ourselves frolicking in the sand. It brings us a lot of happy emotions. And a sandbox environment here might just do that in your in your adult life. A sandbox environment is a lifesaver. It lets us test patches in a more controlled environment so that we can catch issues before they reach our live systems. It's especially helpful and useful in identifying any compatibility problems that might occur post a patch deployment. We really don't want that to happen. We need to be prevented from such catastrophes.
So, Nigel, it's not just about finding or spotting compatibility issues. No, we also see how patches interact with other applications, and make sure they won't disrupt essential services once they're deployed. Correct.
Right. It is our first line of defense. It is that razor wire that protects us.
That's
Right?
correct.
A good segue into talking about razor wires and protection. We have something called staged rollouts. Basically, how do I put this? If you're confident enough that our sandbox testing was good, it didn't cause us any problems. We're particularly happy deploying this against my production environment and with the other applications. Staged rollouts sort of let us introduce these patches gradually, as the name suggests, in a staged fashion, starting with a small group of devices that you're okay with being test patch number one. If it does perform well in test patch number one, you slowly expand it across to the devices within your entire organization. But if issues do come up in the first testing systems, you've caught the problem right at its root. You've nipped the problem in the bud, but they have only affected a small subset, not everyone. So you can go back to the drawing board, go back to your sandbox, and test out some more.
Yeah, it's such a smart way to minimize risks, right? Like this way, if there's any lingering issues that didn't show up in sandbox testing, we can catch them before the patch is fully rolled out.
That's true.
It's a dual layer approach, absolutely. Sandbox first to find out what issues are, and then stage rollouts to refine and monitor the patch's performance in real conditions, of course. Together in tandem, they make your patching process much safer and much easier to be implemented in your stage environments.
Yeah.
Correct. It's true.
So we've talked about the metrics here. We've talked about the ways of deployment of and testing out these patches. Let's talk about the real aim of the game here. How do you measure if your patch deployment was actually a success or not? Let's talk about how we can tell if your patch has been deployed successfully. The real backbone here that I'd like to talk about when you're ensuring the successful nature of patch deployment is continuous monitoring. Just because a patch is deployed doesn't mean our job is done. It doesn't mean we can take a step back. We need to keep an eye out on these systems to make sure that they are behaving as intended after the deployment of the patch.
Correct.
Monitoring doesn't really do more than help us spot any issues. It not only helps us spot issues that might not show up right away, it also gives us real time data and analytics to make sure that what's happening in the system is intended. Sometimes patches may introduce a little more a difficult threshold of finding out what's wrong, introduce little subtle problems that only emerge over time. So, real time monitoring is the only way we can catch these problems early or anytime down the road as they happen.
Yeah. And then there's application and system stability. So this one's pretty straightforward. So we need to make sure applications are running smoothly without any glitches or performance drops after the patch, right? So even if a patch fixes a security vulnerability, it's not a success if it disrupts core applications. So stability is what determines if the patch was truly beneficial.
That's well said, Nigel and Shreya. Now, stability doesn't mean avoiding crashes, right? We are also looking for performance consistency.
Yeah.
Apps should load at the same speed, respond the same way, and it should not create any frustrations for the users. Very important. If you look at the last point, uptime and downtime metrics. If our patch causes downtime, if it's impacting productivity and costing the company, right? Measuring these metrics gives us a very clear view of the patch's real impact. Now, our goal uh, is to patch without introducing any additional downtime. Ideally, what happens is users should hardly even notice that the patch deployment has happened, you know, because everything keeps running smoothly. Nigel?
Definitely, Rakesh. This is what sets apart a reactive approach from a proactive one. By tracking these indicators, we're not just patching, we're kind of ensuring patches are really delivering the right value.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So now let's tackle one of the toughest part of patching, knowing when and how to roll back a patch. This isn't something we do lightly, right? Nigel, what's your view on this?
Well, rolling a patch back or rolling something back is like hitting the reset button in your devices. Right? We need to make sure that it's the right call. We don't really want to roll back a successful patch. The first step is identifying the signs that a rollback is actually needed in that environment. Now, you might ask me what the signs are. Well, one of the biggest indicators is system instability, and we have talked about this a lot. If you're seeing crashes, freezes, or any kind of disruption in essential services post patching activities, that's a big no no. That's a big red flag. You need to hit the reset button as soon as possible there.
Okay. So, Nigel, what are the other signs?
Well, Rakesh, another sign is if the patch causes some, critical applications to break down, as the text suggests there, or maybe behave a bit erratically or unpredictably. If users can't access core functions, it can be more harmful to keep the patch in place than to roll it back. Once you've sort of identified the need to roll a patch back, we should have a process to do it smoothly. And knowing when and how to roll a patch back gives us confidence to act quickly if something goes wrong. It gives us that word in hand, which I keep saying again and again. It's not just about fixing an issue, but sort of maintaining reliability for everyone involved.
That's very important. So, Nigel, uh, can you take us through a demo of SanerNow capabilities in patching and deployment, and how it helps in ensuring a no consequence approach to patching?
Rakesh, it's funny because you mentioned demo and we have been talking about it a lot. I believe it's a good time to show you the platform we are so engrossed in. So I'd love to do that, and I will be sharing my screen here so that you can have an idea of the magic that happens behind the screens. So I wouldn't go through all the bells and whistles of SanerNow as a platform because we do have a symphony of tools to help you out with your patching activities. The first thing that I'd like to bring your attention to within the platform itself is something we mentioned, the ability to discover what's in your environment. Seeing is believing, as I will reiterate. By finding out what's in your environment across the different hardwares, the softwares, the virtual machines that they are, you have a bird's eye view of what's actually running. And by having that accountability that these devices are in my environment, you know what you need to patch first. So that's step number one, where you go ahead and find out what you need to go ahead and patch. The next thing that we need to find out is of the devices that I do have within my environment, what are my top 10 devices? Organizations nowadays have thousands of devices, 2,000 devices, and in the patching systems, the patch teams rather, they think to themselves, where do I begin? What is my P1 device that I need to focus on first? So, with that vein, we have a tool to help you out called risk prioritization, where we will break down the risks into four main buckets here. So, for the ITSM oriented audience here, what I could say is that these are your P1, P2, and your P3 and P4 tickets. We call them the Act 10 Track, Start, and Track. And as spoken before, it is derived from the SSPC framework. These are the tickets that you need to go ahead and look at immediately when I'm talking about your Act. So, in other words, for me, I have about 512 risks that I need to patch first as soon as possible. If I can patch them after this call, I should go and do that because they are very important for me. They could cause the most problems to me in my environment. The next is attend, which you could think of as your P2 tickets. These vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. Maybe you can talk to your security teams and let them know that they need to fix these as soon as possible. Somewhere down the week should be okay. For your track star and track, honestly, a 15-day patching cycle for your track star should be fine, and a 30-day patching cycle for your track should be okay because these are your P3 and your P4 tickets. But I'm not coming here to tell you how you need to go ahead and patch. I'm telling you that these are the ones that you need to focus on first. So with SanerNow, you're sort of taking a step back. If I look here, I have about 18,000 different risks. Don't quote me, my math's not that great, but about 18,000 different risks. I know now that I need to focus on 512 patches. This is what I need to deploy first. That's a good segue into fixing what's wrong with patch management. And once you sort of find out that your P1 tickets need to be patched immediately, this is what you need to go ahead and deploy patches for. With patch management, you can do exactly that from the same console. You don't necessarily have to pull out a report from one tool, push it out into another tool, and then patch it, get another report, and push it back here, and check if the patches have actually been deployed. You take away a lot of manual intervention here and siloed approaches, and have this entire process inculcated within one dashboard. Speaking about the patches that you need to go ahead and deploy, once you figure out your top 10, your top 20 patches, your P1 patches, if you may, you can come here and we show you a couple of things that you can aid you and help you with the deployment of these patches. And to make your life a bit easier, we have segregated patches out into security and non-security. The primary difference here is, well, if a patch addresses a certain vulnerability, that's a security patch. But if Google Chrome is going from 10.1 to 10.2, that's an application update. You could say at the end of the day, that is not something that you need to focus on immediately. That's a non-security patch. So by divvying up the patches that you need to focus on first into security and non-security, and then further divvying them up into your P1 tickets, you know this small subset of patches that you actually need to patch at the end of the day. How do I patch these patches? You can click on the patch here, go to the apply of the selected patches, and we have a whole host of controls here, which I won't bore you with. But I will spend a little quality time on test and deploy, which is the, what's over our head here. With test and deploy, what happens is you could go ahead and do exactly what we've been talking about so far. You can test these patches out in your devices in a staged manner. You can go ahead and sandbox them so they can you make sure that you catch any problems as early as possible and take control of your patching activities with testing them out properly first in a more controlled environment. Now, if you're a particularly adventurous person, if you're particularly brave out there, and you're happy that a successful test has occurred, automatically push them out onto your production devices. It's not something that I necessarily recommend, but you have the option to do that. You can save some time and push out successfully tested patches out onto your production devices. But if you want to be a bit more conservative, there's also the option to test patches out first and then reinitiate a task to go ahead and produce them and push them out onto your production devices. Both ways are possible, of course, for the feeble-minded and for the not so brave part. Right? We spoke about automation as well, and a key aspect of automation is to have zero-touch patching. And with zero touch patching, essentially, you're removing a lot of the manual intervention first and foremost. You can go ahead and test these patches out and then deploy them all automatically. You can choose what devices and what applications you want to go ahead and have an automation rule enforced for. So let's say, for example, you want to go ahead and create an automation rule that says for Patch Tuesday on a monthly basis, go ahead and deploy any patches that are released by Microsoft. So I can create an automation rule that says for the second week on maybe a Wednesday, let's say, I'll go ahead and deploy any patch that is released by Microsoft against my Windows environment. So I'm always up to date with my patching activities. This can be applied across groups, across devices. If you want to test them out first onto a small subset of your devices, you can, because sometimes you might not always have the most secure patches. Talking about the most secure patches, I would like to say that patches released by anyone out there, be it Microsoft, be it Linux, be it a third party application vendor, these patches are first tested out by us locally in our environment. So we are your first line of defense here when we talk about patching and patch testing. If a patch is not that good to be deployed in your environment, if it causes you a problem, we will know because we have tested this patch out. We have found that it caused a problem, and as such, we will not necessarily deploy it, or rather show it to you for you to go ahead and deploy the same patch. No, we'll just show you the patches that have been tested out, and after testing, we haven't found any problems. So, in a way, we're keeping you safe by being your first line of defense. But that isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. If you just take our word for it, I would still suggest you go ahead and test your patches out anyway. So, once you have deployed these patches, it is important to keep a continuous eye on everything that's happening, monitor your systems in real time. And with endpoint management, some key metrics that come to my mind and what I want to look at my system is, for example, let me go ahead and see if any devices in my environment, the CPU utilization has spiked up. have a couple of devices in my environment have a lot of their RAM being used up. Is their memory being consumed too much? So these are factors that are important for me. I need to know that if this patch has caused me a problem, what is the problem? How much of my network has been consumed? Right? What is the CPU load that is being shot up? This is important for me to know that this patch has caused this adverse effect in my environment. So we have talked about the patches, we've talked about deploying them after testing, we've talked about the continuous monitoring of what can happen in your environment with the platform here. And just to tie everything up in a nice ribbon, you could also make an alert to alert you if you have any certain problems. If a patch causes you a problem and you see that a critical engineering system has their CPU utilization shot up, you can get an alert just saying that. Nigel system has had his CPU shot up. It could be a problem. Maybe you want to go ahead and roll this patch back. So that could be automated as well, cutting out all of the manual intervention that is usually done. And for the documentation owners out there, we have something called as reports, where I can go ahead and create a custom report that says, show me all the patches that have been successful, show me my risk prioritization report, show me my patch impact report, to tell me the success of my patching activities. How many have failed? How many have been successful? In this way, this report is a good indicator of your patching activities, where it's a good benchmark to go against in future patching schedules. Of course, you can save this report and send it out to whoever you want to, maybe your IT admin, maybe your manager, to show him or show her that this is what's happened. These are the numbers to back myself up. So I won't go too much in detail, like I mentioned, but I'm all ears for your questions, of course. I'll jump back into the demo now because I have a couple more things that I'd like to talk about. And what I would like to talk about here next is, to bring the presentation back up, is something very interesting that is pretty interesting to talk about. But I'm done with the talking here. I'll let Rakesh take over from me.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Thanks for the demo. Very interesting. And now let's take a very quick look at the platform itself. You know, which we've been talking for quite some time now. Now, the platform really covers all aspects of compliance management, asset exposure, vulnerability management, endpoint management, and batch management. We do also cover repository anomaly management in that. It's so comprehensive.
Sure. And like I mentioned in the demo here, Rakesh, it's not about having these siloed approaches. The interesting thing about the platform is you're not juggling these different tools up, right? You're not having a separate team manage one tool, a separate team managing another tool, and another one managing another one. It's one single console, right? You have everything you need in one place. And to back this whole thing up, you might ask yourself, do I need a separate agent for all of these functionalities? Not necessarily. We have a one single agent solution, so we do get a unified view of our entire security posture. So having all these capabilities centralized means we're not just responding to issues, but we're actively maintaining your cyber hygiene across the board. We're telling you what your score is, we're telling you where you need to focus on first, and that's power that you have to have in your hand.
Yeah, true. And like, whether we're on premise or in the cloud, SanerNow adapts to our environment. So that's flexibility is crucial with hybrid infrastructures becoming the norm, right? And it's a fully automated platform and it's designed to be proactive, not just reactive. So continuous monitoring and automated scanning means we're staying ahead of attacks.
That's true.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground today. So you can ask any questions if you have.
We, yep, I think we have one.
You know, guys, I would just be back. Like Rakesh, I have to go get my charger for my laptop, so give me a quick second.
Sure, we will be answering this question.
Yep. Right, apologies for that delay team. I see we do have a question here from Casey Newsom. Um, I'm not necessarily understanding how patch management would help with the CrowdStrike outage situation. The outage was caused by an application change that is not part of an application update patch. Does the system integrate with application to stop key function of those applications? CrowdStrike Falcon uses channel files, updates throughout the day that are not part of the system. Would these files be halted if until they are tested and reviewed? Well, it's a good thing you mentioned that, Casey, because there's a key difference here that happened with CrowdStrike and how their agent functions. Well, the Falcon agent, it doesn't necessarily perform the same way that ours does, in the sense that we don't necessarily operate at the same layer as the Falcon agent. We don't have the control over your system that the Falcon agent took part of. So does the system integrate with applications to stop key functions of those applications? Well, we have something called as posture anomaly, where let's assume you have a particular application, and that particular application has found to be running erratically within your environment. Let's say it's been found to use certain resources, it's been making some outgoing ports, it's been making some malicious calls to some outside domains. You could be alerted in that particular manner. You could be noted that this particular application is making these outbound connections that it shouldn't actually be doing. This is what's happening. Here's what you need to do to go ahead and fix this. So we would go ahead and tell you what the application is doing anomalous, what is the irregular behavior of this application, and then tell you how you can go ahead and remediate this. Do you want to block this particular application library? Do you want to block the port that it's communicating with or communicating out of? What is that you want to do? So we give you a couple of options here to go ahead and fix that problem.
Okay. Okay. All
Okay.
right.
So
Any-
before we wrap up, we want to make sure you have our contact information in case you'd like to continue the conversation. So if you have any further questions or need any details, feel free to reach out at info @secpod.com. You can also visit us at secpod.com, and you can also try SanerNow for free. So thank you once again for joining us today. We hope you found the session valuable and informative, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for joining this webinar, and please do mail us with your questions, more questions, and we'll be glad to answer them more.
Thank you guys so
Thank you.
much.
Have a
Thank
nice.
you.
Have a
Thank you.
nice day.
Thank you.